Hey, it's Bear Gardener, and it's the Retribution video. I said I'd do videos on all of the mechanics for covert operations, and this one's coming last because we've only just seen the final card from the Retribution Pool. So I'm going to do a video on the new Retribution mechanic archetype. I suppose you'd call it an archetype because it's US only. Anyway, before we get to that and discuss all of this, I am Bear Gardener. I am a Kards Content Creator, member of the Kards Contributor Program, and also, I suppose, a very focused new player to moderate player content creator. My content tends to focus on giving advice to newer players and or breaking things down in ways that people can understand, which is why I have been doing so many videos in the run-up to covert operations to get people into a good place. You can see all of those in the playlist, link down below probably. Be the same playlist this video is on, in which I have covered all the cards that are coming out or will have by the time that release happens tomorrow morning. Means I might have a later day today, because I need to get the last card reveals and do the final videos, but anyway, it's very exciting. But I have attempted to cover everything, and this was, of course, on the list, because Retribution is a new thing. So, first of all, what's Retribution? Okay, so Retribution is the new US mechanic in this expansion. It is exclusively US, and it is very particular. And it's representative of kind of counter attacks and offensives, and the idea that, anyway, it is harder to explain in a short sentence, which is part of what we're going to get into. But the heart of it is that Retribution, the center of Retribution, is a pool of 12 cards. These are cards you cannot include in your deck. They can only be created. When they are created, or more specifically developed, see my video on the develop mechanic, but the shorthand is going to be covered in a bit, actually, because I'll cover it when I cover the other key card in this archetype. But those 12 cards, that's the heart of Retribution. There are 12 cards, and any time that you are developing a Retribution, you will choose from, you'll see 3 of those 12 cards and pick one of them. They all have differing effects and costs. They all have exactly the same name and exactly the same artwork, which in and of itself could be an issue, but we'll get to issues later. There are some, but I'm going to try and look at this analytically, but my old spoiler warning, I have some issues with this mechanic. But anyway, that's all going to be in my opinions at the end. First of all, let's actually look at Retribution, and more specifically the cards that are part of the Retribution mechanic. Then we'll look at the Retribution pool. Okay, the starting point. So this card is critical. This is Outrage. This is a 1-cost US order. It has no rarity. Cool art, by the way. I'm going to say that a lot, but it's become a habit now. But this actually really is. But this is a 1-cost US order that has no rarity. It has no rarity because, of course, this is effectively a token. It is a card that can only be created by other cards. This 1-cost order says develop a Retribution. As discussed, Retribution is a pool of 12 also rarityless cards that can only be created. So when you play this card for 1 cost, you will see 3 Retribution cards and pick one to add to hand. Right, so far, so simple. Get an Outrage from wherever you get an Outrage from, develop a Retribution, Retribution does a thing. Right, so where do we start getting things like Outrage? And this is where we get into the actual cards that play around this. First card is the 121st Infantry Regiment. This is a 5-cost, 1-op cost, 5/4 Blitz US infantry, which is going to see play. You're probably going to see this in a lot of US frontline decks because it fits very nicely into the slot vacated by the 2nd California's exit. It's a standard card, so you'll see plenty of them, and it has a destruction effect on top of its already, frankly, pretty decent stats. Honestly, even without the destruction mechanic, which we'll discuss in a minute, this would not be a bad card for a frontline deck. 5/4 body's decent, Blitz is always good, 5 cost is about on curve for this, and is a place where US Frontline wants to have a 6-drop, because this is, of course, a 6-drop. It is a Blitz infantry, which means you want 6 credits, you want 5 to put it down, 1 to put it into the Frontline. This is a slot that the US wants to have something to play in Frontline. So this card is going to see play, which means that by default, even in small quantities, Outrage and therefore Retribution are going to see play. This will be relevant later. It's almost like I plan these things. Anyway, Destruction. Add an Outrage to your hand. So here we go. This is how we get access to the Outrage. When this dies, which it will eventually, you get a 1-cost order in your hand, which you can then use to develop from a pool of other orders and countermeasures. Spoilers, there's a countermeasure in there. Right, so this one is relatively simple. This is just a good solid card that happens to add Outrage as a side mechanic. Sure, okay. But we kind of need to go a bit deeper to start understanding whether Retribution actually is a thing or just something. Blue and grey. So this is a 6-cost, 2-op cost, 6/6 US infantry. It is a special. It has extremely cool art, by the way. And critically, this is the beating heart of Retribution as an archetype. Because this card has, when a friendly unit, including this, is destroyed, add an Outrage to hand. So every time one of your units dies, you get an Outrage, which means there is always a price for destroying your units. So there's a lot to unpack there, because that's quite a powerful effect. You'll see more about it when I do on the card review of this, which I think is in the last video. I've kind of lost track. You'll get there. But anyway, in and of itself in this video, I will say this is a solid card as long as this is an archetype you want to go into. Its lack of blitz and its high cost are not great, but honestly, even sat on the support line while your smaller units are being destroyed or trading out with your bigger units, this thing has value because it's constantly pumping Outrage into your hand, which is letting you access the Retribution Pool, which is not nothing, which we will of course get to in a bit. Right, another order. This, aside from the insanely cool artwork, this is a genuinely very pretty card, is Furor. Furor is a 1-cost US order. It is limited, so you can run 3 of them. And this is kind of interesting. Fully repair a friendly damaged unit. Add an Outrage to your hand. Right. So this, on top of blue and grey, means that you can repair one of your big heavy units. So if we take just the previous cards that we've seen, you put 121st forward, support it with blue and grey. 121st takes a battering, but you repair it with Furor, gaining an Outrage. However, eventually 121st dies, at which point it generates, it puts an Outrage in your hand, and then blue and grey puts a second Outrage in your hand, which means you have 2 Outrages in your hand. Those 2 Outrages allow you to develop 2 cards from the pool for Retribution. See where this is going. So this is very, very capable of proliferating. Furor will, if people try this archetype, and they're going to, Furor's going to see play. Right, speaking of going to see play, this is Yank. This is the capstone, the payoff, whatever you want to call it, the big deal of this archetype. And it really is a big deal if you can get it to work. Yank is a 6-cost US order. And it says, this battle, when you develop a card, also develop a Retribution. Right. Now, in this deck, in this archetype, develop is going to be happening all the time. You add an Outrage to your hand, that Outrage develops a Retribution, except it doesn't. Now it develops 2 of them. If you can get this to work, it is very strong. Now, in and of itself, this is an elite, of course. There is only 1 of them in your deck. However, this plays into develop, and there is an allied nation which I think will see play for this archetype. It's Japan, and it will see play because of the existence of a card called Air, Land, and Sea, which says, it's an order, and it says, develop a card in your deck. That is a card in your deck at the time of playing Air, Land, and Sea, so the thinner your deck is, the smaller the pool is, and it's develop a card, not draw a card. So yes, if you play Air, Land, and Sea, and get Yank, then play Air, Land, and Sea again, and get Yank, then actually draw and play Yank, you could effectively have this thing running 3 times. And yes, it stacks. This is not an archetype which is not going to see play, and it becomes a question of, is the juice worth the squeeze to get all this access to the Retribution Pool? That's going to be the heart of this, because this is all boiling down to what's in the Retribution Pool. Is it enough to care? This is the Retribution Pool, and I'm about to answer the question about the value of this. So this is the first Retribution card in 12. We're going to see all 12 of these cards. This first Retribution card is a 2-cost order, and it says, deal 5 damage to a target unit. This is targeted 5 damage. This is a good card. It's not an amazing card, but it's a very good card. 2 cost for 5 damage to a unit is decent. I'll say now, the Retribution art is really cool, because you're going to see a lot of it. Second Retribution card. This one is also 2 cost. This one also targets a unit, but in this case it says deal 2 damage to a target unit, draw a card. This is very good. 2 damage is significant. It targets a number of 2 defense units that can be a pain in the backside. It can deal with any 1 or 2 defense unit, of which there are several, that might be causing you a problem. So obviously, Pathfinders, if you're playing against US, it can remove that. This could remove Berg's Pioneers, stopping the credit acceleration. This can remove the 22nd Infantry, killing off card draw. You see where I'm going with this. This card has a utility, and then it draws you a card. This is literally half and half of the British draw order and a damage order. It's good value. You're not sad to see this card. Right. More expensive Retribution card this time. This one costs 5, and it says deal 2 damage to all enemy units. That's good AoE. It's not amazing AoE. I mean, strap bombing's out there, that's 3 damage to everything, but that's 6 cost. Or not strap bombing, carpet bombing. Anyway, there are various other ones that are out there. But this is about on value, and it is important to note this is a card you can see a lot of because it effectively appears in your hand for free. Yes, it's expensive, but it can be very potent. It's probably not the most powerful of the Retribution orders, but it's not bad, and you can certainly make use of it. And we'll get to it later, but the key with this is that you get some utility with Retribution because you're picking one of 3. This isn't being forced down your throat. You will have other options. Next, we have a 1-cost Retribution countermeasure. Just to make this just that touch more complex, which we'll get to in a bit. Now there's a countermeasure in the pool, and this one is when a friendly unit is destroyed, destroy a random enemy unit. For 1 cost. This is not a bad payoff for holding up 1 cost. It's not a great payoff either, but it has some utility, particularly if you play it at the right time, and much more importantly, it has the utility of the fact that you can see it and go, nah, I want something else. This doesn't light the world on fire for me, but it's also not terrible. And it is relevant because it's a countermeasure in this pool, and we'll get to that in a bit. Next, a 0-cost Retribution order. Deal 2 damage to target unit. 2 damage for nothing to a unit. This is just good. This is just value. I've already said 2 damage is not nothing, and this is free. I mean, technically it's 1 cost because you have to have developed it from an Outrage, but we'll get to the reasons why Outrage will proliferate, all that. But ultimately, this is good. This is good value. 1 cost to deal 2 damage to a target unit is not bad. This will see play. It will ping your stuff. You will not like seeing this do damage to your units. It can again remove a number of units which are not insignificant. 3 damage Retribution, 3 cost rather, Retribution. Distribute the attack of friendly unit as damage between all enemies. This is weird. This is so situational it hurts, because you need a friendly unit that has a huge amount of damage, or exactly the right amount of damage for it to be relevant. However, this played on blue and grey, which is 6 attack, is 6 damage distributed between all enemies for 3 cost. Depending on the board state, that's okay. It's a 6 damage IGN Shinano, is what this is. And that card sees play. And that card requires you to actually have, multiple units on the board, so much so that it was nerfed to not count HQ as card on the board. I'm just saying, this is not necessarily as situational bad as it looks on paper. There will be times when this thing can have a kick. And again, just Retribution. You don't have to take this. You will have a whole 2 other options that you can choose from. Right. Another Retribution. This one is 2 cost. Give a friendly unit +2/+2 and Blitz. So, okay, this one's very situational because you have to play the unit onto the board. Then you have to have 1 cost, have paid 1 cost at some point to develop this, because remember, you have to have played Outrage to develop all of these. Get to that properly at the end, so these all technically cost 1 more, but it gets weird. Then you paid the 2 cost, and that unit gets +2/+2 and Blitz. However, on a small unit, Greyhound becomes 3/5. It's already got Blitz. But also, is the Blitz the big part of this card? I'm not sure it is. I think the +2/+2 is the big part of this card. Blitz is just a bonus. Why I choose Greyhound as an option. But honestly, you could throw... There are a number of other things. Aircrafter that comes down, give it +2/+2 and Blitz. That's not terrible. Anything with Fury. You happen to have a Brit ally and access to... Anyway. Just saying. There are use cases for this, or Japan ally and dirt cheap units that already probably have Blitz, but again, the +2/+2 is probably worth the cost of entry if played at the right time, because it's not nothing, especially when you're adding both potency and longevity to a unit that has only one of the two. Anyway, this is not a terrible card. Again, it might not be the best of them, but you're not necessarily going to look at this and be like, oh, this would be terrible if this is the one I have to take of the 3 I choose. I can probably live with it and find use for it later. Righto, speaking of use for it later, 2 cost Retribution. Target friendly unit gets Destruction. Add a copy to owner's hand. Now, clearly, this could be crazy, go nuts. Because this can let you recur all sorts of janky stuff, from deployment effects to taking, for example, a card which, when it dies, develops a Retribution, to then put it back in your hand at the same time. And develop another... Yeah, there's a whole list of things you could do with this, and we'll get to why I think this is the Retribution issue later. This is one of the cards in the Retribution Pool that I have the largest issue with. Not the only one, but one of them. But anyway, on the face of it, though, this is quite a lot of squeeze for decent but not amazing juice, unless you have a very particular, very, very desirable target for it. That said, it will probably still occasionally get picked, because destruction effects do have the advantage that at some point they're going to trigger. Probably. Right, hello the big boy. This is the inevitable, in my opinion, 12 cost Retribution order. 12 cost, deal 3 damage, draw 3 cards, gain 3 extra credit slots, and your units get +3/+3. I'll read that again, because it's a lot. 12 cost, technically 13, because obviously you've developed it. Deal 3 damage. Note this can be to the enemy HQ. Draw 3 cards. Gain 3 extra credit slots. Your units get +3/+3. This is the Retribution win con. Not going to mince words, it just is. If you play it at the right time and you can afford it and you're ramping, and we'll talk about why you almost certainly are in a Retribution-based deck, this card is insane. The value is huge. 3 extra credit slots, 3 cards to use with my 3 extra credit slots, 3 damage to something that's annoying me, and all of my units get +3/+3. Yes, please. As an end game card, this is really, really strong. This is a very powerful capstone card, and if you play Retribution right, you're going to get the chance to get at least one of them in your hand. Talk about that in a bit too. But this is worth bearing in mind. This is the big capstone. Right, here's another interesting card. This is a 1 cost Retribution order. Again, technically 2 cost. But it's very good. Retribution. Target unit gets +1/+1, which is pretty good. Set its operation cost to 0. Now this is big. Especially if you drop it on a little blitz tank or something similar. Or if you're just putting it on a really high op cost, big punchy unit that now operates for free. There are a number of really good targets for this card, none of which are going to be sad to see it, and it's not particularly expensive for what it does. This is good card. Good card is good card. This is not strong card of doom, but this is definitely usable, definitely playable, and definitely has the potential to be potent. Right, another order. 3 cost, deal 4 damage to a target in the enemy support line. Your HQ gains +2 defense. Okie dokie. This is also incredibly good. It is 4 cost. Again, you have to pay 1 to have it and then pay 3 to do it. So you've paid 4 in total at some point. We'll get to why staged paying is also a thing that is relevant to this archetype in a bit. 4 damage is really an important number because it removes a number of really important cards in the game, not the least of which are the 5 0/4 smokescreen units that sit in the support line for every nation. Every nation has one of them, and this will remove them. It also blows up most big bombers. It's really good. The +2 HQ defense is just cherry on top. This is just good removal. It's a little expensive, kind of in the same bracket as Pummel and its new German cousin, Tip of the Spear, in the sense that it's quite costly but very effective. But credits aren't going to be a problem for this archetype, which we'll also get to in a bit. So yeah, this is another good value order. Saved this one till last for a number of really good reasons. This is a 4 cost Retribution. And it says, develop 2 Retributions. No. just no. This is where I started to come off the train with Retribution. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But I have a huge problem with the existence of this order because it gets silly. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a second. Right, back to me. It's time for me to dispense my thoughts on Retribution and why I'm really not chuffed. Not happy, for those who aren't Brits. Retribution, at this point, rubs me up the wrong way as a designer. I'm not... As a player, yeah, it's going to be there. I'll learn to deal with it. As a designer, as someone who has an interest in game design, I have real problems with these cards. But in particular, I have real problems with specific parts of these cards. So, let's talk about them. First of all, this is RNG. And RNG is okay, in fact necessary, in competitive games, especially competitive card games. For goodness sake, we're shuffling up our deck before we start playing the game. So, obviously, RNG is fine. However, too much RNG gets... Sorry, RNG, random number generation, or effectively randomization. There is a very random element to this, which you can funnel, but makes it complicated for your opponent, and we'll get to that in a minute. As a player who is running this archetype, I have to have my head round the randomness of these cards, but then we've got a number of ways round that, because we have a number of ways of generating lots of these, and of course we're choosing one from 3 when we see the 3 of them, so we're almost always going to get something useful. All of which would be kinda sort of fine if one of the cards didn't also say, do this twice more, which I have a huge problem with. I cannot express the degree to which I really wish 1939 would just remove that Retribution from the pool before they launched this game. Not because it's overpowered or insane or any of that, because it's just lazy and bad design, and I don't say that lightly, because I know how hard it is to design and balance things, but Retribution developed 2 Retributions. Why? Why would you do this? In what world is adding RNG on top of RNG a good thing? This is one of the things that drove a number of very good players away from Hearthstone for at least a while. Some of them have come back. I didn't. Because you started to have this cascade effect. And this is a cascade effect from a cascade effect. Which leads me to the second problem I have with this, which is cognitive load. We are already seeing cognitive load being strained in this expansion. And I'm not just talking about cognitive load for top players. Top players will probably learn to deal with this stuff, because they always do, and they're very focused, and they're going to do this, and they've been around for a while, which means they've got a head start. But for newer and intermediate players, this is getting stupid. We have got countermeasures, which you need to learn the existence of, be aware of the credit cost of, and look out for someone who is floating, that is holding back enough credits to trigger a countermeasure. Then we have Covert in Covert Operations, which is a bunch of face-down cards on the table, which you have to have a decent idea of what each one is, because some of them have the kind of effects that you really don't want going off. And then you have this nonsense, which is your opponent plays a card, which then turns into potentially 2 or 3 other cards, which could be anything. Why is this good? Also, what on earth did you put a countermeasure in the pool for? Just leave them as orders. There's no need for there to be a countermeasure in there. There really isn't. It just adds yet another level of excess thought for players to have to deal with, because now it's like, oh, did they get the 1-cost countermeasure, or do they just happen to have 1 spare credit? In a archetype which, by the way, is going to have spare credits, because where you are going to see this see probably the most play, and I can't be certain, but I'm standing on the hill fairly confidently here, is you are going to see this played in US Japan. The reason you are going to see this played in US, Japan, is Air, Land and Sea, which is a Japanese order, as I said earlier, which lets you develop a card in your deck, which means that you can start getting more copies of the things that get you more copies of the things that can theoretically generate you double bubble by getting you to generate 2 more copies of the same thing. Except, of course, by the way, those 2 more copies of the same thing could generate another 2 more copies, which is 4 copies, and you can see where I'm going. Oh, that's a lot. And that is my issue. My issue is that it is a lot. My issue is not with this as an idea. Sure, why not? It's actually quite an interesting design space, if handled with delicate hands and consideration. If, however, it is just a boatload of really quite decent value cards that you have excess access to, it becomes silly. This archetype, I could be wrong, by the way. This is not a declaration of absolutism, but it is my opinion. This archetype is going to see play for a while, and it is going to be hell on wheels for moderate and intermediate and new players. It's just going to be unfun to play against, because it's going to go from, oh, there's that card, and then that, and then, oh, this is, oh, Lord Yank's on the board, wait, no, wait, and then suddenly cards everywhere. Orders popping off that do all sorts of really good value things, your opponent suddenly developing card after card in hand and then gaining other cards because they somehow got Yank into play, and it's going to get ridiculous. And then suddenly they'll just play the 12-cost win condition and you'll be like, well, that was fun. This will see play, and the archetype will be built around US, Japan, and then ramp cards. America at War. War Machine will go into this deck, in my opinion, along with a few small units that can give the early game some presence while you're waiting for all this Retribution to start popping off. I will probably build it, I will probably play it, because I feel the urge to test everything, but this is probably going to fit into the Japan self-discard pile of decks that I just don't like playing because of the randomness. I've said this before, I don't like piloting a deck that feels like it's like I'm making one decision and the other 5 are being made at random. This is actually less random than it looks on the outside, which is the actually terrifying part. Because of the way Develop works, this is actually quite controlled access to a very good pool of cards. Anyway, it does have the downside of being a bit slow and quite expensive. Note, all of these effectively require you to have put something on the board that can create the appropriate outrage, and then pay the 1 cost for the outrage to get the Retribution. So these are not going to be just appearing at great pace, but they're also not going to be hard to do if this is the archetype you go for. My opinions, make of them what you will. I obviously have concerns. Anyway, I'm not going to go on about this for much longer, because this video is probably about half an hour, which is plenty time for you to do, considering there's more from me to come on this day, because this will be going up on Monday, along with anything else that I need to do to close out Covert Ops before it launches tomorrow morning. So, thanks for watching. I will be back, because I'm about to go start recording and cutting together some more stuff. As ever, stay well, be good human beings, and I'll catch you next time.